Growing up in Michigan, camping trips were a tradition for Luke Reynolds and his two best friends, Jason Miller and Ethan Brooks. They'd been inseparable since high school, sharing everything from birthday parties to backyard bonfires. Their bond only strengthened as they entered adulthood, often escaping into the wilderness to reminisce about old times and escape the pressures of life. But one trip, one that was meant to be nothing more than a weekend of beer, laughter, and stargazing, became a story none of them would ever be able to forget, no matter how hard they tried. It was late September when they decided to venture out to Havenwood National Forest, a lesser-known stretch of dense woodland about 4 hours north of Grand Rapids. Jason had read about it on an online forum for hikers and outdoorsmen, quiet, remote, and surrounded by untouched nature. "No families, no noisy kids," he said with a grin. "Just trees, a lake, and total silence." Luke, who had just broken up with his girlfriend, was eager to clear his head. Ethan, always down for anything that promised solitude and cold beer, agreed without hesitation. They packed lightly. Just enough food, sleeping bags, a tent, water purifiers, and of course a couple of six-packs and a portable speaker. The drive up was filled with loud music, fast food wrappers, and exaggerated stories of their high school mischief. The road into Havenwood was narrow, winding through miles of pine and oak, the sunlight barely cutting through the thick foliage. As they parked the car and grabbed their gear, a peculiar stillness hung in the air. It wasn't the peaceful kind of silence they were expecting. It was heavier, almost uncomfortable, like the forest was holding its breath. Ethan joked about it, saying, "What is this, a horror movie setup?" They all laughed it off, brushing it aside as an overactive imagination. They hiked about 2 miles in before setting up camp near a small clearing close to a creek. The area was perfect. Trees stood tall like natural guardians, and the sound of the water running nearby offered a calming white noise. They built a fire, roasted hot dogs, and drank as the sun dipped below the horizon. It was all going well, until that first night. It was around 1 a.m. when Luke first noticed it. He had stepped away from the fire to relieve himself and wandered slightly into the woods, his flashlight flickering due to a dying battery. That's when he heard it, twigs snapping not far behind him. At first, he assumed it was one of the guys playing a prank. "Jason," he called then. "Ethan." Silence. The snapping continued, slow and deliberate. Not the erratic scampering of a deer or the rustle of a raccoon, but heavy steps, cautious, watching. He turned quickly, flashlight in hand, but saw nothing. "Get a grip," he whispered to himself. He hurried back to camp, heart racing a little faster than before. When he returned, Jason and Ethan were still at the fire, laughing over a joke he'd missed. Neither of them had moved. "You guys didn't follow me?" Luke asked. Jason raised an eyebrow. "Why would we?" Luke didn't say anything else. Maybe it was just his imagination, or maybe a bear. They made sure to secure the food before bed, hanging it from a tree and locking away anything that could attract wildlife. Still, when Luke climbed into his sleeping bag that night, unease curled up with him. The next morning was bright and warm, the kind of early autumn day where the air feels crisp and clean. Luke tried to shake off the weird feeling from the night before. They spent the day hiking around the creek, skipping rocks, and even swimming briefly despite the cold water. But as evening came and the sky turned dark, the tension returned. That night, Ethan was the first to say something strange. Around 11 p.m., just as they were getting ready to settle into their tents, he swore he saw someone in the woods. "I thought it was a hunter or something," he said. "But they weren't carrying a light. Just standing watching." Jason laughed at first, but when Ethan didn't crack a smile, his expression shifted. "Where exactly?" Ethan pointed to a small ridge about 20 feet away from the edge of their camp. Jason grabbed the flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. "Nothing." "You sure?" Ethan nodded slowly. "I know what I saw." Luke said nothing. Inside, he felt a cold chill creep into his chest. He thought about the footsteps the night before, and suddenly, everything didn't feel like imagination anymore. They agreed to take turns keeping watch that night just in case. Jason volunteered for the first shift while the others tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. The forest was too quiet again. Luke found himself staring at the nylon ceiling of the tent, every tiny noise amplified in the darkness. Sometime past 2 a.m., he was awoken by a sharp whisper. "Luke, get up." It was Jason. He sounded shaken. Luke sat up quickly. "What is it?" "There's someone out there," Jason said, eyes wide and voice low. "He's been walking around the perimeter for almost half an hour. Doesn't say a word. Just walks." Ethan was already awake, pulling on his boots. "We need to leave. Now." They grabbed flashlights, collapsed the tent as fast as they could, and packed up only the essentials. As they worked, they kept hearing it. Slow crunching footsteps in the brush, circling, always just out of sight. The worst part. No voice. No movement toward them. Just constant presence. When they finally set off with their packs half open and their breaths quick, they didn't look back. The trail out seemed darker than before, colder. Every now and then they thought they heard something behind them. Footsteps echoing theirs or the faint sound of breathing. They reached the car just as dawn began to color the sky. But the horror wasn't over yet. As Luke turned the ignition, Ethan let out a gasp and pointed to the trees behind them. There, just at the edge of the forest, was a figure. Not moving. Just watching. From that distance they couldn't make out details. Just a pale face, dark clothes, and a presence that froze them in their seats. Jason hit the gas, and they didn't stop until they reached a gas station 20 miles away. None of them spoke much on the ride home. The silence in the car was different from the peaceful quiet they had wanted. This silence was filled with questions, fear, and unanswered nightmares. Weeks passed. Luke tried to move on, but his sleep was haunted by dreams of that forest. He searched online for stories about Havenwood, anything that might explain what they had seen. Most of what he found were vague mentions of disappearances, hikers gone missing, campers who never returned. Nothing concrete. No arrests, no names, just rumors. Ethan swore never to camp again. Jason grew distant, quieter than usual. It was like the forest had taken something from them. Not physically but mentally, emotionally. They were never quite the same. Luke later learned that the area near their campsite had once been home to a small cult in the 1970s. Local legends spoke of strange rituals, people in the woods, sacrifices that were never proven but whispered about for decades. Law enforcement had cleared the area long ago, but some say that not everything had been found. Or stopped. To this day, Luke can't look at forests the same way. Even a walk through a city park makes his skin crawl. He avoids camping invitations and deletes trail photos from his social media feeds. But every now and then, late at night when everything is still and quiet, he thinks about that pale face.